The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Warren Stokes and I will be your host and presenter today. I would like to provide a little bit of context for the rest of the presentation today. I first became interested in geodesic domes in 1977 when I was living on a tract of 480 acres of land in southern Oregon. And the actual name of that land was the Institute of Essential Knowledge. Sometime later, we became aware that other people were calling it a hippie commune, but nevertheless, the intent of that group of people that turned out to be upwards of 30 people had a common goal, and that was to establish ways and techniques of living in a sustainable manner, doing things for creating shelter, growing food, and creating other sustainable technologies, and basically living off the land. And one of the things I did was became interested in the building of a geodesic dome. The photos here just kind of show the transition of my involvement over time. And since 1977, I've done a lot of different things, and I happen to be involved in a software company now. But I thought I'd take this opportunity to share also why I'm presenting today's program. And that is, it stemmed from some conversations I had with members of my family, and we're all talking about, what could we do each individually to help, basically make the world a better place. And we discussed the idea of, well, somebody should capture some of this knowledge that we have collectively and individually and maybe preserve it for future generations. So I thought, well, that sounds like a job for me. I happen to know a little bit about the subject, so I'm going to share with you today a little bit about how to build the geodesic dome. So as I mentioned, where it all began was this land tract in southern Oregon, and one of the things that I wanted to do was, in keeping with the concept of the Institute of Essential Knowledge, study ways to develop sustainable shelter technology. So I studied the technology and I built a geodesic dome to live in. I'll comment a little bit on this, and as we get into the detail, we can explain more about the how-to and all of the mathematics and technology that went into this. But this is a geodesic dome home that I built using natural materials, all just poles and lumber out of the forest, rocks from the fields, and the only non-natural material I used was composition shingles. This is actually built using rock wall, poles from the forest, recycled wood that we got from old buildings, and I did have to purchase the actual composition roofing that went over this. But my friend who later became my wife, Justine, lived with me in this dome for quite some time. It was very comfortable. Just to give you an idea of how it turned out, here's an interior view showing the interior pointing at the fireplace, and you can see the rock wall and the naturally made fireplace along with the interior of the dome using the poles from the forest and the recycled wood. Here's another view of that, hanging a few paintings there, and one of our friend's children there with us. And you can see in the foreground here the sheepskin, which we used in lieu of a mattress for the bed. By the way, those are hand tanned. And that's a subject for another webinar perhaps of how to tan hides and furs. Here's a view where we actually looking out of the dome from my little art studio view and looking out through the picture windows over the landscape in southern Oregon. So let's start with a little background on geodesic domes. It was kind of struck me that the earliest domes, and I did some recent research on this, are actually wiki-ups. And the funny thing is, Justine, my wife, actually built one of her own wiki-ups. It didn't look too dissimilar from this in these photos, and it was one of the earliest forms of domes used for shelters. As you can see, wiki-ups are constructed basically using branches from trees and natural materials kind of laid out in shingle format to protect you from the weather. So the wiki-up is a term that was from the indigenous North American Indians, Native Americans, characteristic of many of the northeastern people, but also in the Great Plains and the Plateau and even California cultures. And this was a very common form of shelter, and the geodesic dome they didn't even know they were inventing it at the time, but they were getting close. And one of the reasons that the dome structure has such appeal is it basically encloses space in the most efficient manner that is mathematically possible. Imagine that, these ancient people discovering such a technology. So the idea here was to just basically take tall saplings, drive them into the ground and bend them over, tie them at the top, and then cover them with natural materials, which was surprisingly efficient in keeping the weather out, creating a warm, nice, comfortable environment and a nice living structure. So this was actually one of the earliest forms of the use of the dome format. Now guess what? Our brothers to the north, historically, many years ago, up to 1,000 years ago, discovered the technology on their own using their own natural material, and they're called igloos. That is also one of the earliest forms of using domes for shelter. So an igloo, as you may know, is just a small house made of snow and or ice, but it's perfectly suited for life in the cold Arctic environment, you know, and they don't have any wood or stone or brick. All they have is a lot of snow and ice. So this is the cool thing about humans, is they learn how to basically use what they have in nature. And as you probably know, igloos are one of the classic forms of shelter, and guess what they are? They're domes. Awesome, and they're very comfortable. I've actually built one myself when I lived in the northern reaches of Canada. But along comes technology, and the person behind it all, or at least the person who's widely credited for inventing the geodesic dome, is Richard Buckminster Fuller. He's widely known as just Bucky Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was an American architect, a system theorist, a designer, inventor, and I also want to point out a very good book, by the way, that you could read, is he wrote the book called Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And that's an awesome book, by the way, a little off topic here, but I just thought I'd mention that. But Bucky Fuller created the geodesic dome, and one of the stories that I read was that when he was 5 years old in grammar school, they gave him a project to create a structure out of little bits of clay and little popsicle sticks. And everyone was making these little rectangular house-shaped structures, and you know, the kids were pretty good at it. But Bucky Fuller, you'll never guess what he did. He started assembling them in triangles, and he basically started creating geodesic domes with these little bits of clay and popsicle sticks. This is a true story. Now, although he's widely credited with inventing the geodesic dome, he didn't actually invent it. Another gentleman by the name of Dr. Walter Bowersfeld invented it technically, but Fuller was the first person to get a U.S. patent on it. So here's a photo of one of his early dome designs, and one of the concepts here was that it's very light. You can build a structure that, you know, in this case, people can just lift off the ground and move. It's awesome. And another thing I wanted to point out, that domes can be large. One of the largest, actually the largest wooden dome in the world is based right here in Tacoma, Washington. You can see that dome, and that's actually Mount Rainier in the background. It's just awesome that people can come up with these ideas and over the years evolve them technically and just adapting to local materials, and then finally build one of the largest, you know, structures in the world made out of wood, or at least geodesic dome structures. So now we're going to get into it. So how do you build a geodesic dome? What I'm showing you here is actually a photograph of the geodesic dome that I recently built in my backyard, and I use it for basically a mini greenhouse. You can see from the photo that it's not very large. This one is about 40 inches in diameter, but you know, it's been a wonderful experience building that dome. And what I did is I made it into a little greenhouse, so you can see the gardening underneath it. And by the way, in a future update, I'm going to show you some photos of some of the results of this. And I planted at the same time in the greenhouse. I planted some tomatoes and some other plants, and I planted in my just normal planters at the same time, the same exact seed stock and the same exact plants, and I watched them grow. And in the course of a couple of months, you'll be surprised with the outcome of that. I'll show you that in a future session here. But one has to understand the background of the mathematics, and so please allow me to elucidate a little bit on the mathematics of the geodesic dome. I find it fascinating, and I'm sure a lot of you will as well. You don't really have to understand all these mathematics, because I'm going to go through a very step-by-step how to cut the pieces at what angles and put it all together. But the mathematics of the dome basically derive from a very ancient discovery, if you will, called Platonic solids. And Platonic solids, to put it in just normal day-to-day terms, is basically a geometrical enclosure that all uses the same length of sides, and it encloses space with the least possible number of pieces of material. They also happen to have, and as you'll see here, the same number of faces meeting at each vertex. So this is amazing. This was discovered thousands of years ago. In fact, they were discovered by Plato the philosopher, the ancient Greek philosopher, who theorized on a lot of different things, but he was credited at discovering, if you will, this idea of Platonic solids. So let's walk through some of these. The tetrahedron is the most basic form, and it consists of the fewest number of pieces. Basically what it is 4 triangular pieces put together, and it creates a little kind of a 3-sided pyramid. Very unique. There's only 5 ways to enclose space like this. This is a real key concept. The next most complex structure of this type is the cube. Now, we're all familiar with the cube. You know, Western world lives in cubes. For some reason, we adopted that, you know, as our kind of our living space geometry, and we basically live in cubes and rectilinear prisms that are consisting of cubes and their counterparts. And it's interesting to see, and just to compare it to the tetrahedron, if you look at that, that's almost a teepee. Add a few more poles, you got a teepee. Now the next one up is the octahedron. It has 8 faces, basically 2 4-sided pyramids facing each other at the base, at the 4-sided base. Each of these is very unique, and they use exactly the same length struts or pieces of material, and they enclose space in the most efficient way. Now the next step up, and this gets us into our topic today, is what's called the dodecahedron. This is the shape that uses 12 faces. Each of them are pentagons, and they're just interlinked together to form almost close to a sphere, as you can see. And the dodecahedron is what became kind of the basis for the geodesic dome, but it had to be combined with another element, and that's the 5th of the Platonic solids, which is called an icosahedron. The icosahedron is 20 faces. These are 20 equilateral triangles put together that in such a way that they enclose space. So you might be wondering, okay, but where do I get the geodesic dome from all this? Well, that's my next point. And remember, only 5 geometric solids meet these criteria. That's a key concept. Perhaps in a future webinar we'll get into some of the attributes of those and why that's important in other areas. But in 3-dimensional space, as I said, a Platonic solid is what's called a regular convex polyhedron. That means it has all the same length pieces of material to construct it. There's only 5 ways to do this in the whole universe. It's amazing. And basically each of these faces are meeting at each vertex, so with the same number of faces meeting at each of the intersections. Let me go back to that for just a quick second. I just want to share this visual with you all. So you can see here that what we're starting to look at are the 5 Platonic solids and how they might be used together, which is a key concept here. So the 5 Platonic solids, when you start looking at them like basically interlaced or overlaid amongst each other, you'll see that there's some very interesting things that emerge. In fact, so dome mathematics consists of a variety of different dome designs, and the 2V geodesic dome is what I'm focusing on here, which is the simplest of all the domes. So it's a good place to start if you're a new dome builder. And the 2V geodesic dome is the mathematical intersection of the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. Wow. I've taken this on as my social media avatar for a little while here. I just love this photo, this diagram. It shows you in the center the colored shape is the icosahedron, 20 equilateral triangles all connect together, and it's enclosed by, in this case, a dodecahedron. And this is in fact the mathematics that allow you to create the first geodesic dome. It's the mathematical intersection of 2 Platonic solids, the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. Now, if I'm losing some of the audience due to the depth of the mathematics, don't worry. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts and how to. You don't really have to understand this. I just personally find it fascinating. Now, another important aspect of building domes, or for that matter, any structure or geometrical shape, is the importance of what are called dihedral angles. These are the angles at which the planes intersect. Why are they important? Well, you'll get the idea as you look at this, but it's the angle between the intersection of two planes, and this is really important, actually crucial, if you're going to build a design of a dome that utilizes panelized construction, because the intersection of those two planes represent the intersections of two pieces of wood, plywood, or other material, and you have to know these angles. Now, I don't expect you to jot all this down and remember this. This whole thing is being recorded for you to share and refer to later. You can share it with your friends and use this as a reference guide. But this shows you the dihedral angles of not only the 5 platonic solids, the tetrahedron, and you can see the dihedral angle, 70.53 degrees. Hexahedron, or by the way, hexahedron is another name for the cube, or vice versa. 90 degrees, of course, right? That's your dihedral angle of a cube. Everyone knows that. Octahedron, dodecahedron, icosahedron, and so forth. Now, for bonus material, I've included some Kepler solids and some quasi-rectangular polyhedra formulas for you that want to, really get into it a little deeper. Maybe create some decorative items, or who knows what you might come up with. And by the way, as I go through this, I wanted to point out that I'm giving credits to all my sources here. In this case, it's expressed down here in this blog, Fun with Mathematics and Science, and so forth. So each time I use material that I've sourced, I try to give credit as credit is due. But the importance of the dihedral angle is just something to really get your mind around. It's the angle at which these planes intersect. All right, we're on a roll now. So let's talk a little bit about what a dome looks like. So from the interior, basically it's an intersection of the icosahedron and the dodecahedron through a variety of angles and mathematical principles that I'm going to teach you today. And you can see there's hubs that interconnect the different points, and we'll get into the detail on that. The hubs themselves, I have a patent pending concept, invention on, and that is the use of a very simple concept, and it's the use of a PVC pipe section cut to a short section of whatever the width of your material is, in this case 2 inches approximately, and it's used as the hub. The key of this is it does not require high precision in the cutting of the struts and the construction of the dome. And the other aspect to this is just I came up with this idea of just zip tying them to the PVC hub. It works great, I got to tell you. So you can kind of see some of the visual examples of what that looks like once you've constructed it. So you get your mind around this. All this is a number of straight pieces of wood or other material, hubs, which can be really any material. The hubs that I used when I created the dome in Oregon at the original institute were just sections of steel pipe. I hadn't thought of the idea of maybe using the PVC pipe, and I just drilled holes in sections of steel pipe at the right angles, and it allowed me to bolt the poles from the forest in the same fashion. You can use any material that you might think of. I'm using, in this case, 2x2 lumber. It's very cheap. I mean, it's like 25 cents a foot or less. You can get it as scrap in a lot of cases, and I use it basically as the entire construction for all the struts is just 2x2 lumber. But as you scale up, you could use 2x4s, for example. I'll get into the scaling here in a moment. By the way, if you have questions, please insert them into the chat control panel, and I'll take as many of those questions after the recorded session of this program today. So let's kind of get into some math here. I don't want to overwhelm you with mathematics, but you have to kind of get your mind around this a little bit. So this is how I calculated the base of the dome, and what it is, it's a 10-sided polygon. So let's think about this for a minute. Most of you took some basic geometry at some point in school. I happen to really enjoy geometry and analytical geometry in school, so I kind of get a kick out of doing this stuff. But it's not terribly complicated. A circle has 360 degrees, and by the way, a circle is just a polygon with an infinite number of sides. I'm going to repeat that for you. A circle is merely a polygon, a multifaceted shape, with an infinite number of sides. So a polygon just breaks it down into a certain number of sides. In this case, a regular 10-sided polygon. And it's called a septagon if you want to impress your friends. You say, oh, I learned about septagons in this webinar last night. So if it's a 360-degree circle, we all know what that is, I think, divided by 10 is what? 36 degrees, right? So that's 10 divided by 360 divided by 10. So that gives you the angles of these intersections of these struts. And we'll get into a little more detail on that later. Awesome, though. It's just fun to play with this stuff. And as you start designing your own domes, you get out your protractor and your ruler and your calculator and have a lot of fun doing it. Simple stuff, though. This is how, though, to calculate the basic dimensions of the base of the dome. Because after all, that's what you want to do first, is decide, first of all, where you're going to build the dome. You know, in my case, I had about a 40-inch planter, and I wanted the thing to fit right over it. So I made the radius 20 inches. But what we're going to focus in on is actually the radius of the dome. Now, the radius is merely the distance halfway across the circle from the center to the outside edge of your circle or your polygon here. Radius is half the diameter, if you will. So the key thing to keep in mind is figure out, you know, the diameter of the space you want to close and just divide it by 2. That's your radius. Why is that important? Well, I'm going to show you. But just parenthetically, in this case, if you used a 30-inch radius, which is a 60-inch or 5 feet diameter, then what are you going to create? A dome that sits on a space that's 5 feet wide. Awesome. Hope you're all enjoying that. That's some good math there. All right. So let's take a look at what you get and how we derived all this. Now, if you really like doing math the hard way, you can figure all this out using geometry and Pythagorean theorem and a few equations like that. But really, I'm going to make it simple for you. And what this breaks down to, by the way, is a 60-inch, 5-foot diameter dome, which has a radius of 30 inches. By the way, you might make that feet. You want to build a, you know, a dome that has 30 feet radius. You can do it. It's the same concept. Just remember to scale up your material accordingly. So these things you can use as reference if you choose to build this exact size of dome. But the most important thing is that you'll see that there is a link here to a calculator. And I wanted to give credit to Geodome and all the wonderful folks there in the United Kingdom that came up with this wonderful website called geo-dome.co.uk. And they have a wonderful calculator that just lets you input. In fact, let me just go to that. I'm just going to show you that for a moment. Let's go to that calculation tool. So here's the website, geo-dome.co.uk/2vtool, ASP, etc. All you have to do in this little calculator tool, which is a beautiful thing, is put in your radius. Like if I put in 30 and say calculate, it will give me the strut lengths and the diameter and the surface area and the floor area, all these things you need. If I put in 75, you can see it gives me different strut lengths and so on. So I just wanted to point out that when I'm talking about that, that's what I'm referring to. Pretty awesome. So I just go back for a minute. That's the link that's in this PowerPoint. By the way, I'd be happy to send you this PowerPoint, especially to our founding members, who many of them are on the call today. I'll give you all credit where credit is due, and at the end of the program, we'll take any questions that you have. In any event, let's go back and kind of continue here. So the basic idea is you have to create essentially a half circle if you want kind of a half of a sphere of a dome. So if you look at here at this diagram that's color-coded in 2 different colors, you can see that it kind of approaches the half of a sphere. Now there are other dome styles. You could create a whole sphere. I don't know what you'd do with that because it would be hard to sit on a level area, but this is a great one. This is exactly what I used when I built the dome at the Institute of Essential Knowledge in Oregon. I did put a little 4-foot rock wall base around it, which, by the way, you can do. You can put any kind of base you want on this. And I created the struts according to the length of that from that calculation tool or through your own calculations. And you can see that what those struts are. I've given you the length in the prior slide, but you can see here that this says it's 74 degrees on the A strut and 72 on the B strut. They're color coded, so the base is all B struts. You need 10 of those and so on. Now, if you're using, I'm going to get into tools here in a moment, but if you're using like a chop saw or a radial saw, miter saw, that you'll actually be using the inverse of that. So 16 degrees would be what you set your saw out, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. In any event, what I'm trying to do is give you some very practical step-by-step instructions on what you need to build your dome. and part of it, of course. The main part is actually building the struts, sawing them at the right angle. Now remember, you don't really have to be to the 1 degree accuracy or even half a degree. That's more accurate than almost any of us can saw manually, certainly more than even power saws can. So get close, 74, 75 degrees, 15, 16 degrees, we're close enough for dome work. So in this case, again, the radius of the dome of 30 inches gives you a diameter of 60 inches or 5 feet. The strut lengths are about 16 inches or so for the A struts and about 18.5 inches for the B struts. And this shows you how many you need. So you can actually, one of the questions I get is, what does it cost? What does it cost? Well, do the math. It's like 20 cents a foot, or maybe you salvage the lumber and you just buy some PVC pipe. I'm going to talk about that now. The materials needed. Well, you need the 30 length of the A struts, 35 of the B struts. You need 6 5-way hubs and 10 6-way hubs. Now these hubs are nothing more than like a 2-inch section of PVC pipe. In my dome, I used 1.5-inch length hubs. You literally just cut them with a saw or a hacksaw or chop saw. And when I say 6 5-way hubs, that means that there's holes in them spaced around the circle of the hub. The 360 divided by 5. If you're using 6-way hubs, it's 360 divided by 6 to create the whole pattern. I have another diagram on that in a moment. And you need 10 2-way hubs, which form around the base of the dome. And we can go back to that if we need to. But here's a very, very important thing. If you're using my quote-unquote construction method using this zip ties and the PVC pipe hubs, be sure to subtract the hub diameter, say a 1.5-inch diameter PVC pipe, from these dimensions, except for the base struts. Actually, while we're thinking about that, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to explain that while we're looking at some photos here. So let's go back to some of these photos here I was talking about that I referenced earlier. So a 5-way hub is shown right here. You can see it right here. All I did is I made holes in the PVC section, 5 of them evenly spaced around the hub. Literally just drilled it with a drill press or a drill. And on the base, though, it's a little different because you don't need 5 or 6. You just need the 3-way. So keep that in mind as you think about building your dome. And again, this is all recorded. I'll send you the whole slide deck and everything like that. So that's the idea of the materials, the raw materials needed. So let's go in and take a look at the rest of basically the tools needed. Good news, you don't need a whole lot. You could actually build this entirely using hand tools. A hand saw, got to have some way to saw the pieces of wood and the pipe or the sections. But you know what I got for about 150 bucks is this thing. It's awesome. It's a chop saw basically, but it has miter cuts available in it. You can actually do dihedral miter cuts, 2-way mitering, so that you can create panelized construction. But I digress a little bit. Saves a lot of time, but not needed. You can just do it by hand. Maybe you prefer that. Another thing you need, of course, is a tape measure. Tape measure. And if you don't want to get a power drill or use a power drill, maybe you want to experiment with just doing this all by hand, there's a thing called a brace and bit. Extra credit for those of you who have actually used one of these. This is what a drill used to be. Of course now, and I will admit what I used is a nice little electric drill. It's good to have either an electric drill or even a cordless drill. You'll also need some zip ties, enough to go around. They're super cheap. You just buy plenty of them. I actually bought the white kind because I thought they looked better, but they didn't show up on my white background, so I showed a picture of some black zip ties. These are just zip ties. You buy them at any hardware store. And last but not least, you need a protractor or some way of measuring the angle of your cuts, which is built into one of these power saws, by the way, typically. So this is all you need. It's all really basic tools needed. Won't cost you a fortune. I'll just tell you, I think I put about $100 worth of materials into my dome, and I already had most of these tools, so it was pretty awesome. Now, are you ready? Drum roll, please. I don't know if you can hear that. This is the secret sauce right here. This is the hub connection method, which I am claiming copyright on, and I'll be working on filing a patent on. So this is my invention disclosure at this point. And this is what I consider to be the secret sauce. I came up with this idea kind of out of the blue as I was just toying with ideas, and here's what it is. It's this idea of creating a section of pipe. I'm saying PVC pipe for the sake of discussion, but it could be any pipe material cut to about 1.5 inches length in these struts, in these, the length of the hub, piece of pipe, if you will. And then these holes are just drilled around it in 5, 6, and 3-way hole patterns. Awesome. Now these struts themselves, these are those angled pieces of 2x2. You just drill a hole in the end and you attach zip ties to each one of them, and it's just freaking amazing how well that worked. So I'm very happy with that. I'm glad to share that to all my friends and family and people in the Institute or interested in this whole concept. So this is the secret sauce. This is what you've been waiting for. That is the key to this whole construction design. So as you start looking at what you're going to be doing, you're going to be creating a base. That's along the bottom here is the 10-sided polygon. It's kind of like a circle, 10-sided circle made out of 2x2 sticks, if you will. And here's the little PVC hub connections, each connected by zip ties to each of these different patterns. And remember to go back to the original kind of blueprint to determine what size hubs they are, what length, and what angles you cut them. But that's it. Now, if you take a close look, you can kind of see how this is constructed at a little more detail level. So you can see the hub, piece of PVC pipe, in this case 3-hole pattern, and zip ties. Amazing. All right. And again, if you look at this from the standpoint of the finished domes, here's what it looks like from the inside of the dome on the base along the bottom, and these are just the 2-way struts coming out. By the way, it is useful to color code your pieces of material. You can use tape, felt marker, paint if you want to leave them covered, but that just kind of helps you get organized and keep things going in the right way as you put it together. But this is from the inside base. Here's another photo of the same hub construction for a 5-way hub. There's the PVC pipe. Here are the zip ties, and there are your 2x2 struts. Awesome. Now, you will probably want to do a little bit of work on how do you create these 5-hole patterns. So just get your protractor and a ruler and just do the math. 360 divided by 5 gives you the degrees between each of these. And what is a useful thing to do is to create what I call a jig for this. So you can just create either a piece of, a construction out of wood, something that circles the hub, so that when you put it in a drill press, it has the hole patterns all pre-drilled. It just saves you having to mark each single hub over and over and over because there's a whole bunch of hubs. If you need more thoughts on that or questions on that, just let me know. And again, you can submit questions during towards the end of this session. If you have any questions, I'll answer them after the recorded version here. But here you go. It's the 1.5 inch. It's a very standard size PVC pipe. You could use white, black, gray, whatever you want. I like white for the sake of argument. It's 1.5 inches, so you know what the diameter is, and just do the math. It's quite easy. So I wanted to wish you all happy dome building, and I also wanted to provide just a little bit more resource information and contact information. Here's my email address. Any of you that are interested in this subject, feel free to communicate by email. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. And the Institute of Essential Knowledge thanks you, and so do I very much, and I hope we can all work together to help the world be a more sustainable place. And I wanted to provide some visibility of the topics that I wanted to cover in the future, because this is really the first in what I hope to be a series of these webinars to capture all of this knowledge that we want to preserve. One of them, the next ones, will be building a renewable energy system. I have quite a bit of background in that, many years of experience in it, so I'll be glad to share my knowledge and experience with that. Another topic, which we actually have done a lot of, and that is creating our own clothing. Now, one of the ways to create natural clothing is tanning buckskin or other hides. That was one of the first ways cavemen got clothed. But I was just at the Seattle Art Museum, and I saw a wonderful exhibit of Native American artifacts and stuff, and one of them was this clothing made out of cedar bark. It was amazing. I'm going to have to find somebody who knows that technique. But I'll be able to share my experience in tanning and making clothes out of buckskin. Another one, and I'm looking for volunteers and participants in all this, will be organic gardening techniques. organic gardening is definitely a key part of essential knowledge. We need to preserve that and share our best practices and things of that nature. And I have a personal friend and member of the family who I'm going to ask, I won't mention her name now, who's just an amazingly skilled person in the art of basket weaving, and she studied Native American basket weaving. And hey, containers, you got to have your containers to go gather your fruits and nuts and stuff, and store your food for the winter. And then another topic is using sailboats as a self-sustaining habitat and vehicle. That's subject for another story, but I have many, many years of experience in that as well, and I hope to share that with all of the public, the interested parties, and very, very importantly, the members of the Institute of Essential Knowledge. Now, there are several opportunities for you all on the call today. These are opportunities for involvement, basically stuff that I'm asking people to volunteer their time and knowledge on. So any kind of contributors for sustainable lifestyle skills, the likes of which we've been talking about today, are much appreciated. Send me an email. Let's see if we can get you hooked up, maybe do a webinar together. Also, we'll need some website design and content. The instituteofessentialknowledge.com is a URL, but I haven't built the website. Would love to have somebody help me build a website. Also, logo art, logo design, and general graphic art production. I just love to have some help on that as well. And just in general, spreading the word. Remember, this concept and the purpose of this program today is to it's about doing something that really matters. Be part of something that matters. And one thing that matters is preserving our knowledge and sharing it with other folks for the future so it doesn't get lost. And that I am committed to doing that. Now, I also want to, as just kind of a closing note, and from the bottom of my heart, I want to have mention some special thanks to the founding members and all the people who signed up for today's webinar. Amber, Josh, Veronica, Kathy, Diana, you know who you are. And I really, really appreciate all your help. So thank you all, and oh, Vicki, she was the last one alphabetically, and Vicki, thank you very much for all your ideas and input so far. And I want to wish you a great day and a great growing season, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon at a future event of the Institute of Essential Knowledge. Thank you very much.